Howdy folks, and welcome back to not quite the Sunshine State Rails. It's now February of 2025 and my annual week has come to go up and visit my buddy Andrew in northern Georgia on the CSX W&A Subdivision, and so him and I could spend a few days following trains around the respective W&A and Chattanooga Subdivisions. Today we'd pretty much be focusing entirely on the Chattanooga Subdivision to the west of said town, but we'd catch our first few trains down south on the W&A side, following them into Chattanooga and then going from there. Starting with this E319 coming north through Cartersville, Georgia just after 9:30 a.m., with an empty string of coal hoppers returning from South Carolina. But running in front of the E319 by about 10 miles, we heard an I-142 calling signals headed north. That's an intermodal train running north out of Jacksonville bound for North Baltimore, Ohio. As we then follow the W&A north behind the E319, we heard that the I-142 was going into the siding at Tunnel Hill, Georgia to meet a southbound manifest train. So we'd make a quick swing into town to catch the southbound train at the crossing of Oak Street at the Tunnel Hill Visitor Center. First and foremost, a quick shout out to the mother and son that we met here in Tunnel Hill, Caroline and Corbin Weber. It was very nice meeting you folks, and we hope that you had a fun trip and safe travels back to your home on the East Coast. As for the train itself now, running south is manifest train M583, southbound from Radnor Yard at Nashville, Tennessee to Rocky Mount, North Carolina. This train will stop and work roughly 6 CSX freight yards on their tri-state trip to North Carolina, such on the W&A here that include Wahhatchee, Tennessee, Cartersville, and Atlanta, Georgia. And fresh out of Wahhatchee now with a new crew, it's very easy to see through Tunnel Hill how this tiny town got its name. The very large hill in the center of town that has a 1,400-foot long railroad tunnel cutting straight through it. You may notice, however, that there are actually 2 tunnels pictured in this shot, with the smaller one on the right having been the original W&A railroad tunnel. Completed in 1850, this bore would guide trains through this hill throughout the American Civil War and beyond until the early 1920s, by which point freight trains on American railroads were beginning to get longer, wider, and taller, meaning that the original bore would no longer be large enough to accommodate the giant trains that would begin running the United States systems. So by 1928, a much taller and wider bore had been cut through the hill, now large enough to accommodate double-stack containers and tri-level auto racks. This secondary bore is still in use today with CSX's W&A Subdivision and remains as the only active railroad tunnel in Georgia, with the original W&A railroad tunnel still standing and used by the Tunnel Hills Historical Society for historic guided tours on the appropriate days.
Well, friends, I guess we'll be doing another little mini vlog here of today. Now, a different kid and I are going to follow some trains in a different state. Good weather. We're going to see some trains in Chattanooga and beyond.
Hey, your camera says it has a camera error.
Well, that's not my problem, because as far as you're concerned, it's your camera for today, so that's tough.
With the M583 and a chat with our new friends out of the way, we trundle our way on north through Ringgold and Graysville on towards Chattanooga. The I-142 intermodal train in the siding at Tunnel Hill would have clearance to head on towards Wahhatchee in Chattanooga once the M583 cleared, so we figured we'd find a spot around Chattanooga to set up for the 42.
Okay, here we are at pretty well-known Coffee's Cliff, despite there being nobody here today. This is a very well-known train watching spot, albeit arguably sketchy in an odd part of town, but we won't be here too long, so we'll be all right. We're gonna snag that I-142 here shortly coming north off the W&A. We're at the control point of North End Boyce. That's that signal you'll be able to see in the foreground once I move down here.
Approach at North Boyce, North on Main for that I-142 16 up.
Passing us now is the I-142, hotshot intermodal from Jacksonville to North Baltimore, Ohio. Over the night before, his journey up here included a stop in Atlanta to work the facilities at Fairburn, and now they're coming into their next stop in Chattanooga where they'll work the yard at Wahhatchee. Now, I'm not sure if there's any interchange with Norfolk Southern involved in that work, but once he gets out of here, he'll be a combination of intermodal containers and auto racks, and he will be exponentially longer than what we see here. As the I-142 clears, it reveals what is arguably the most drawing factor for rail fanning this location, the direct view over Norfolk Southern's D-Butts freight yard. The only CSX trackage visible from this location is the W&A Subdivision, which I-142 just passed us on. The rest is all Norfolk Southern, bypass tracks and yard tracks alike. Now, CSX's Wahhatchee yard is not visible from this location. It's a good few miles further to the west, but Norfolk Southern provides a pretty constant stream of switching action visible from this cliff. A stream perhaps so steady that one can easily get complacent, so much so that trains can sneak up on you.
So guys, this is what happens when you get complacent. Stuff sneaks up on you. This is some Norfolk Southern mixed freight that just decided to pop up out of nowhere. Well, clearly not nowhere. Just too arrogant to notice the giant steel rumble outside. Let's see here. Looks like, from what I can see, he's coming from the Atlanta north side, so he'll be coming from Atlanta. Not saying that's where he originated, but from that general direction. He's not coming from the C&O and TP. So, don't know who this is, but yeah, prime example of what happens when you get complacent. But that's kind of cool. Some more yard jobs working back there. And we're thinking about heading out of here and pretty shortly heading over to either Wahhatchee or... Alrighty y'all, so here we are now at Wahhatchee. This is kind of the combining point. This is Norfolk Southern here, and CSX is that track all the way out there. But Norfolk Southern will converge onto CSX right here. And reason for that being is that they share trackage from right here at Wahhatchee all the way over to Stevenson, Alabama. In that stretch of track, you'll be able to see both NS and CSX trains on one route. We got something sitting here. Norfolk Southern Intermodal, but we got a medium approach signal on the mast over here. So sounds like something's coming up out of Chattanooga and is gonna pass this guy up. I don't know if he's waiting to go or if he's just kind of killing the clock here, but that seems to imply that something is coming this way. And CSX's Wahhatchee yard, right, is behind those trees.
Pretty soon out of D-Butts, fresh from a crew change, came a northbound Norfolk Southern double-stack train symboled Z320. As expected, they'd be bypassing that first intermodal waiting on the secondary main before hitting a few switches and diverging off the Norfolk Southern onto CSX's Chattanooga Subdivision. Now, the reason we have a CSX symbol for a Norfolk Southern train is because of the intricate detail that involves the dual trackage. The trackage between here at Wahhatchee and Stevenson is not under dual ownership. The right-of-way is all owned and maintained by CSX Transportation, with Norfolk Southern simply having trackage rights to use it between Stevenson and Wahhatchee, meaning that any NS trains on that stretch of track must operate in accordance with CSX rules. That goes for signal callouts and train symbols. So any Norfolk Southern trains operating over that stretch of track must be given their own unique symbol that coincides with CSX's own numbering system. In their case, the Z stands for a foreign symbol, so Norfolk Southern, a foreign railroad operating on CSX rails, and the following numbers are pretty random, pretty much using any combination that haven't yet been used that day. So Z720 may symbol this train today and a totally different Norfolk Southern train tomorrow.
Z720, 17 NS 1042, bound clear.
As we were sitting here and the Z320 cleared us, another Norfolk Southern manifest train appeared out of the west, stopping short of Wahhatchee waiting for this one to clear. This train coming off of Norfolk Southern's Birmingham branch. The Norfolk Southern doesn't simply terminate here at Wahhatchee and merge onto CSX. The line continues straight to Birmingham with a connection here at Wahhatchee to take the CSX line to Stevenson. NS trains that diverge here onto CSX continue to Stevenson, where Norfolk Southern trackage once again begins to take trains to either Sheffield or the Memphis, Tennessee East End District. But this manifest train here has seen no foreign railroads and is fresh out of iron country, evidenced by all of these steel coil cars that are seen in multiple sets on this train. Ironically enough, steel coils are actually some of the most dangerous commodities that trains can be hauling at any time. A steel coil is essentially a tightly wound strip of multiple steel plates that are held in tension by a single metal strap, and often immense heat is required to mold the steel into the compact roll that it is transported in. And the amount of material that is then compacted into a single coil means that any one coil can weigh up to 25 tons. In short, you most definitely don't want one of these things to roll away on you, because at that point there is almost no chance of stopping it. Next in line finally was the train that had been here this whole time, the Norfolk Southern intermodal that had been waiting on these other two to get by. Finally leaving Wahhatchee just after 1300 was soon-to-be train Z703. Norfolk Southern 4 and CSX 0. There was to be yet another Norfolk Southern train here at Wahhatchee before we'd end up moving on, and no CSX traffic would show up. A meet would happen between this Z703 and a southbound Z607 at the control point of Wildwood about 5 miles west. So, 10 more minutes, and off came a Norfolk Southern manifest train off the CSX side back onto the Norfolk Southern.
60717, southbound, make for number 2. Ready to approach. CSX, and that's 44, road 7 out. E70317, northbound, NS 4013, approach, Wildwood, track number 1. Out.
after our final NS train cleared, finally moving on from Wahhatchee, we'd pretty soon begin to tail the Z703 intermodal that we had just seen before this one, as we'd make our way down the dual-lane Tennessee 134 parallel to the very hilly and curvy stretch of track between Wahhatchee, Tennessee and Jasper at Nickajack Lake. These roughly 10 miles of double trackage basically hug the edge of the Lookout mountain range, and the curvature is very sharp, so trains on this stretch are basically down to a crawl all the way through it. Stopping on the side of the rather sketchy 2-lane highway as we heard another Z train headed our way from Nickajack Lake. Here we have another what I believe to be an old railroad tunnel. I'm not exactly sure about the history on this one, but we weren't going to focus on this too heavily. It was just a known spot that we could stop off real quick to get this southbound intermodal train of an unknown symbol and origin. But it was undoubtedly a train headed for the Norfolk Southern, hence the Z symbol and the unmistakable horsehead locomotives in charge. Shortly after capturing this one, we hopped back on the road and continued our trek westward, catching up to the bottom of the Z703 continuing west, now on the banks of the Nickajack Lake. This is another very popular and photogenic location along the Chattanooga Sub, as the road and tracks basically run right out in the middle of this giant reservoir. This reservoir is basically a giant holding pond for water that passes through the Tennessee Valley Authority's hydroelectric Nickajack Dam from the Tennessee River. Unfortunately though, having only caught up to the very rear of the Z703 headed west, we wouldn't be able to leapfrog the train by the time the Shell Mound Road crossed over the Chattanooga Sub a few miles further. Although you can't see it from this shot, the train at this crossing is entering the double track that begins at this control point of signals named Allerton. Allerton is short for Alabama-Tennessee, representing the Alabama and Tennessee state line that is only about a mile to the south. They'd be going into the siding to meet a southbound CSX grain train. More on that one in just a moment, though we'd find ourselves setting up right here after the intermodal cleared.
Where I believe the head end of that train is, you can see stopped in the siding, which is the intermodal we saw here, is the control point of Long Island. That's in the middle of the double track. This isn't really a siding here, this is more like a 3-mile long double track. And the north end is what, Bridgeport?
Hale.
Hale, that's right.
And then you have South Bridgeport.
Okay, well, we're basically in the same place because now that G489 for Bolivar is meeting this train here, so.
The double track crossing here in the middle of the woods, just a mile north of Alabama, in late February's 50-degree weather and the sunshine made this a very peaceful spot waiting on this train. Sparse vehicle traffic made it so that we weren't disturbed too often. These are the kind of home away from home scenes that I yearn for all year long while driving throughout the hustle and bustle of what Florida has become. Though naturally, being next to a fairly busy railroad track, it can only stay quiet for so long, as what turned out to actually be G439 would trip the signals just shy of 1400.
Clear L from G439, 14 and 26805, stop. Look good, CSX got lost. Look good, got your wire, y'all get rest of your
Looking back on all this now, I have absolutely no idea as to why we thought this was G489 before we saw it. He very clearly called G439, and G489 is a totally different train that doesn't run anywhere close to here. The G439, which we're capturing now, is a southbound grain train from Evansville, Indiana to the Tyson Foods Incorporated grain elevator in Bolivar, Georgia. Bolivar is located just to the north of Cartersville on the opposing Etowah Subdivision, so this train will have to make a reverse turn at the Junta Y in Cartersville to run north a bit of a ways to Bolivar. As the rear of the train rounds the curve soon to cross the Nickajack Lake, we continue our westward trek towards Stevenson, Alabama, and that's exactly where we'd end up next, as there wasn't much to see in between here and there. As we roll into town, we catch up with the very first Norfolk Southern train we saw today. Having experienced a few holdups and speed restrictions on their way here, the Z720 from back at Wahhatchee was just now getting their signals to diverge off CSX and onto Norfolk Southern's Memphis East End district here at Stevenson. With CSX's Chattanooga Subdivision in the foreground continuing towards Nashville, and Norfolk Southern's Memphis East End district in the background continuing towards Sheffield and Memphis, this train, I believe, will be interchanged in Memphis to the BNSF Railway. But we're going to skip over this one here in a moment because we have a few trains that are duplicates of those we saw at Wahhatchee and Point South. This is the first train we saw, so everything else we saw behind it is also due through here. I won't talk much about them as they go by, so let's instead take a look at the Stevenson Depot just to our north. On the sandwiched piece of property right in the center of the junction is the Stevenson Depot and Museum. This brick structure, originally built in 1853, was a strategic refuge and hideout point for Confederate and Union soldiers throughout the American Civil War. It also served as a hotel, and while the town changed hands multiple times throughout the war, the depot and hotel, mixed with Stevenson's geographical location and the juncture here of two opposing directional rail lines, made the Harper's Weekly newspaper, an influential paper of the time, come to call Stevenson one of the 7 most important cities in the South. The building ultimately burned down at some point after the conclusion of the Civil War, but was reconstructed in 1872 and still stands today in the form it was rebuilt in, now housing the Stevenson Hotel and Museum. Well, this next train's not a duplicate, so let's take a moment and look at this one. But let's also take a look at that Norfolk Southern intermediate dwarf signal down there on the left at mile 279.9. This is not an absolute dispatcher-controlled signal, so it only tells about the condition of the track ahead and nothing as to whether a train is coming towards us or not. But at any rate, coming south off the Chattanooga side is southbound M585. Southbound manifest freight from Radnor Yard at Nashville to Howell Yard, Atlanta, with an interesting slug set pair in tow.
Stevenson, 585, 17 south.
Now, as for that Norfolk Southern dwarf signal, as I said before, it tells only about the condition of the track ahead or behind the signal. So the track 2 signal blocks ahead of here is the only bit of track this signal will tell us about. So the yellow approach indication that it displays now is only indicative that the second signal block from here is occupied by something. That doesn't tell you whether it's going away from you or coming at you. In this case, it's just going away. It's the Norfolk Southern intermodal that we just got before this one. It's only a couple of signal blocks away from here, not far enough to clear both of them up yet. And you can see here as the signal transitions from yellow to green. The signal quite literally is interlocked to the next 2 signal blocks, so the train clearing that second block causes it to return to green. If it was in the first block, it would be red, second yellow, third green, and so on. About 20 more minutes and a bite to eat will reveal our old friend I-142 from back at Coffey's Cliff earlier this morning. After having worked Wahhatchee and picked up a whole bunch of stuff, they're back on the trip north for Baltimore. And I'm not going to make you sit through this whole thing, so you'll just have to take my word for guesstimation that this train was around 3 times longer than he was this morning. But you can definitely say for sure that he did not have this cut of auto racks this morning. Nor did he have this second cut of intermodal behind the auto racks. Yeah, this guy was pretty big now. After nearly another 45-minute wait, talks of a train we'd been hearing about for the last couple hours would finally come to fruition, with the intermediate signal giving us a sign almost against everything I just said. If you'll recall though, the signal tells about track conditions ahead, and only when signal blocks are occupied will it change. And with this southbound intermodal making a run towards us, this signal would gradually transition from green to yellow to red, as the train eventually occupied the very signal block this signal was within. Meaning that once it went red, we had a good roughly 2.5 minutes to be ready for this thing. And sure enough, within the time allotted, here it came. Southbound Norfolk Southern double stack train symbol 284. This train, having originally started its journey from way out west somewhere in California, this is a run-through train off of the BNSF Railway bound for Atlanta, Georgia, now running on Norfolk Southern from Memphis to Atlanta. Without the symbol, this train and its counterpart are most often recognized via a couple of key features. Number one, the BNSF run-through power that almost always makes it through the Memphis interchange, and secondly, the nearly all J.B. Hunt containers these trains carry. With 3 locomotives and nearly 2.5 miles of train, I counted 5 containers in this whole lineup that were not J.B. Hunt brand. Now, I don't think that necessarily means anything, but I think it's pretty neat to see a train of nearly all one container type. Alas, we were losing daylight fast, and I wanted to try and get this train on the banks of Nickajack Lake under the beautiful sunset that awaited us. So once this giant transcontinental train cleared us, we got back on the road, making the drive back through Bridgeport and into southern Tennessee, setting up on the banks of Nickajack Lake with only a few minutes before the sun totally tapped out. Now on CSX rails, they'd be running with the foreign symbol Z373. And setting up on the banks of Nickajack Lake, this is one of those moments in rail fanning that would just happen to go right for me. The timing of the train reaching us paired with the timing of the sunset couldn't have gotten much better. And the resulting video is what I now use for my YouTube video intros for 2025 and perhaps beyond. While not having been shot in the Sunshine State, I found this to be one of the most fitting videos I've ever shot in regards to my motto, the Sunshine State Rails. Some orange locomotives underneath a rather orange sky, and the resulting picture that I'd also capture with this train and sunset via my drone would also naturally turn out to be one of my favorite photos of this entire trip, topped perhaps only by some of the snow photos that I'd capture in a couple days, which you'll be able to see in my next video from this trip. But at any rate, our transcontinental train, now coming into the limits of Chattanooga, was rounding Nickajack Lake, and the aerial view from the drone really puts into perspective what a geographical pull this location is for just about everybody. There aren't too many places like this around where you can see railroad tracks and a 2-lane highway paralleling each other out through the middle of a reservoir. And even though that's ultimately what this is, we still know this as Nickajack Lake. And it really fits the theme with this kind of terrain surrounding, and especially seeing it at a time like this. It also puts into perspective just how much stuff that America has managed to haul over railroad tracks. Do take into consideration that if this train did not exist and was not able to transport these containers from California to Atlanta, Georgia, that every single one of these containers would be another semi-truck on the roads and highways of the United States. The amount of man-hours and wear and tear on American highways that this train alone has saved is unfathomable. And it's a fact as simple as this that allows us to easily dismiss anybody who undermines the importance of railroads in the United States or anywhere else. NS Train 284, now Z373, rounds away from the sunset and into the very hilly and curvy stretch of Whiteside. And we wouldn't see the train again after this, so losing daylight very quickly now, we began to pack everything up and consider where we wanted to head out for a makeshift dinner. But unbeknownst to us, we'd have to grab everything back out real quick as yet another train would happen to pop up before we left. As the giant steel rumble approaching that we weren't too arrogant as to miss this time warned us that a westbound train was quickly approaching. Gliding onto the lake now in the very last lights of day was another westbound train, another Norfolk Southern manifest freight. I didn't get a Norfolk Southern or CSX symbol for this one, so in the very last bits of visible daylight, we'll just appreciate the beauty here as we have no idea who this is. Well, we made our way back down to Ringgold. Just too late for a bow and coal train. Empties headed north. I don't know who this is, but missed it by a whole minute. Looking back now, I'm pretty sure this train was symboled E306 or something similar. It's an empty train of coal hoppers returning from the Georgia Power Stylesboro facility, one of the busiest coal plants in Georgia, still receiving a loaded coal train about once every 2 days or better. It quite honestly has been a miracle that we haven't seen one of these trains up until this point, and granted, of course, the first one we see we missed the head end of, but we'd ultimately see a few more within the coming days, a couple of which would even be covered in snow.
ISO is still really cold.
Welcome to Ringgold. And this is, what is this? M584 coming north. Let's take a look.
On the runner-up now, just through Tunnel Hill, is northbound M584. Northbound manifest freight, the sister to the one that we saw over in Stevenson, northbound from Howell Yard, Atlanta to Radnor Yard at Nashville, with one of the most unique engine sets that we've seen on a train all day. The Ringgold depot itself was built in 1849 and served as a strategic hideout point also throughout the American Civil War. It saw the great locomotive chase that terminated only a few miles north of Ringgold, and it was also damaged quite a bit during the Battle of Ringgold Gap, in which it was repaired with limestone blocks that is still evident on some points of the building to this day, seeing as it was originally built with all sandstone. Today, the depot primarily houses the Historical Society and serves as the town's visitor center. Ringgold was just a pit stop for us on the way back as we heard these two trains coming our way, but we'd ultimately have to make it back to Cartersville and Points East before we'd be home for the night. So although there were a couple more trains in the picture for tonight, they would not be of any interest to us until we made it much further south, back to Cartersville south.
Yep. It's a little cold.
We made it all the way back here. And now it's 9 o'clock at night.
We out here for more Tier 4 geos.
After having made it all the way up and down into Alabama, we are all the way back around to exactly where we started this morning in downtown Cartersville. Having leapfrogged this train from Wahhatchee, coming south now is manifest freight M647, southbound from Chicago to Waycross daily. Running from Chicago all the way down to Waycross, Georgia, this M647 is one of the longest distance trains that the W&A sub sees over its rails. The 647 would begin to run on approach signals from this point on, however, as within a couple miles they'd stop at the siding of Emerson to meet a northbound manifest freight symboled M542, a northbound out of Waycross bound for Cincinnati, Ohio. So with that information, once the 647 got by, we'd just sit in silence for another 10 minutes or so before the 542 came north through Cartersville with a rather similar engine set to conclude the night.
Here's M842. Re-symbol of M542. I don't know why they're using an 8, but it's the same thing. Wasn't that a nice ending to it?
Yeah. The 542 would end our first day trackside along the Chattanooga and W&A subs, but on the end here I'm going to throw in a few honorable mentions from the following day. Some cool trains that aren't going to make it into a video of their own, but were quite interesting in that they're not often seen, if at all seen, on the W&A sub. First up from the following morning was this northbound I-026 coming north through Ringgold.
Approach 116.8 north.
I-26 is daily hotshot intermodal and UPS traffic northbound from Jacksonville to Chicago, Illinois, but this is not his typical routing. His typical route takes him out east through Decatur, Birmingham, and Nashville on their way north. However, a broken rail over on the Lineville Subdivision caused this instance to be rerouted north through Atlanta up the W&A sub. So he'll ultimately take this northern track through Wahhatchee out to Stevenson and take the Chattanooga, rejoining with their typical path over at Nashville.
CSX Equipment Defect Detector. Milepost 109.8. No defects. No defects. Total axle 234. End of transmission.
Clear 114.1 southbound main track G289 out.
Coming south now after having met the opposing I-26 in the siding at Graysville is southbound G289, an oddball grain train from Avon, Indiana to Shelby, North Carolina. The oddball bit about this train is that it doesn't run this way typically either. This train's typical routing from Avon to Shelby is way out east of here, over the former Clinchfield, CSX's Kingsport Subdivision. Though, as we know, that route has unfortunately been mangled beyond recognition throughout the recent Hurricane Helene. Efforts are still underway to get that route repaired, but for the time being, many of the trains have been rerouted over the W&A. So rather ironic in that these first two trains of our second day would both be reroutes, although the I-26 was just a one-off thing, while the G289 and other Clinchfield trains will run this way until the Clinchfield has been repaired.
Clear 111.5 CSSD 781 southbound main track G289 10 out.
Later on in the day, after having followed a fairly similar path to that of before, we'd end up following a Z train out to Stevenson again, with a couple of BNSF leaders, a Norfolk Southern train though. When we made it to Stevenson, however, the train would encounter a pretty big hiccup. One of the coupler drawbars on one of their center beam flat cars would pretty much completely detach from the car, leaving the train almost stranded in the center of town. Traffic began to pile up from varying directions, first in line being a CSX grain train coming south waiting off the side of the Chattanooga sub. Thankfully, the handicapped part of the NS train was not blocking the lead switch to the double track that began here at Stevenson, so they'd pull the first half of the NS train onto their side of the junction, allowing track to be cleared so that CSX and other traffic could get through while they waited for a car maintainer to arrive. And I'm including the grainer here simply because it had one of CSX's heritage locomotives on the point of the train. Number 1875, the PNLE would be in charge. This one would be another Georgian grain train, but no reroutes involved here. This was a southbound G437, southbound from Evansville, Indiana to Ranger, Georgia. Not too often seen here, but every now and then we get one, and in this case it happened to have a heritage locomotive in the lead. The train would converge here at the junction before diverging back over onto track 2 of the double track to get around the stopped portion of the NS train. Ultimately, though, it wouldn't take as long as we had expected for the repairs to be completed on the NS side, so the train would be out of here within the next couple of hours. So that said, we'll go ahead and jump over here to the last train I'll include for this video, and in fact, the main reason we came back over to Stevenson for the second day in a row. About 30 minutes after sundown came southbound intermodal hotshot I-025. The counterpart train to the I-026 we saw in Ringgold this morning, but this train is actually not a reroute. Oddly enough, within recent months, CSX has been running the I-025 down south via the Chattanooga and down through Atlanta, while keeping the I-026 out east in Alabama. But while unique and not seen recently, the routing of this train wasn't what appealed about it. It was the leader of the train, number 1776, the Honoring Our Veterans Spirit of Our Armed Forces. This is by far my favorite of the 3 Pride in Service units that CSX did. That digital camo is unbeatable in my opinion. We decided to capture the IO-25 in Stevenson as their inevitable holdup that would happen in Wahhatchee meant that they wouldn't be down the W&A sub till very late tonight, and we wanted to ensure we could get a good amount of sleep tonight because the weather for tomorrow morning was looking promising. And that's where I'll leave y'all off for this video, as day number 3 had some promising features in store. So until we pick up on the morning of February 19th, this is Kotabeaner in Stevenson, Alabama, and I'll see you then on the not-so-sunshine state rails.